She looked like any other young woman, cradling a baby in her arms as she boarded the naval ship. The sailors barely noticed her, until the Admiral himself caught sight of a small tattoo peeking out from her sleeve. His face froze. The room went silent. In that single moment, the crew realized this wasn't just an ordinary passenger, and that tattoo carried a secret powerful enough to shake everyone on board. The rain had just started to drizzle across the steel deck when the ship's engines began their low, steady hum. Sailors in uniform moved briskly, carrying out their duties with precision. Ropes coiled, orders shouted, boots clanging against the wet surface. Amid all the disciplined chaos, no one expected to see her. A young woman, dressed simply in a pale blouse and long skirt, walked up the boarding ramp cradling a small baby in her arms. The infant was wrapped snugly in a blanket, its tiny fists occasionally flinching against the cool air. She wasn't dressed like a naval wife or a visitor from the port. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair tied back in a way that spoke more of necessity than fashion. At first, the sailors barely paid her any attention. Civilians sometimes boarded before departure, messengers, officials, family members with last-minute goodbyes. But there was something different about her presence. Her steps were slow yet deliberate, her gaze fixed forward as though she knew exactly where she was going. The baby never stirred, as if comforted by the steady heartbeat pressed against its cheek. One of the junior officers, a lanky man with wide eyes, paused when he noticed her. "Ma'am, can I help you? This vessel's about to set sail." His tone was polite, though laced with the awkwardness of someone unsure why a civilian woman and an infant had made it this far without question. The woman offered a small, practiced smile. "I have clearance," she said softly, her voice steady. "I'm here to see the Admiral." The officer blinked. Clearance? To see the Admiral? Such requests weren't common, especially not delivered so calmly by someone who looked so ordinary. He hesitated, then nodded uncertainly, motioning for her to wait. The crew carried on with their tasks, but more eyes began to drift toward her. It wasn't the baby, nor the unusual request, but something harder to name. She stood with a quiet composure, holding her child with the kind of protective strength that demanded respect. There was no fidgeting, no nervous glances, just a patient stillness, as if she knew this moment had been inevitable. When the officer returned, he gestured for her to follow. "This way, ma'am." They moved across the deck, weaving between sailors who now watched with curiosity. She didn't flinch at the stares. Her shoes clicked steadily against the wet steel, her free hand brushing her damp skirt as she adjusted her hold on the baby. Step by step, she approached the heart of the ship, where the man she had asked for, the Admiral, awaited. And though she appeared to the crew as just a fragile mother with her infant, hidden beneath her sleeve was a small, dark mark inked into her skin. A mark that would soon stop the Admiral in his tracks. The Admiral was a man who had weathered storms fiercer than most men could imagine. Decades at sea had carved lines into his face and a kind of iron into his posture that spoke of both command and sacrifice. Inside his quarters, maps and naval charts covered the table, scattered with notes of upcoming maneuvers. He looked up when the door opened, expecting another officer with updates. Instead, he saw her. The young woman stepped inside, her shoes squeaking faintly against the polished floor, the baby nestled securely in her arms. She did not bow, salute, or stumble over words of apology. She simply stood there, silent, as though the Admiral himself had been the one intruding on her space. For the briefest second, he frowned in confusion. A civilian? In his quarters? His aide opened his mouth to explain, but the Admiral's hand went up, silencing him. His sharp eyes studied the woman, and then he saw it. The baby shifted, tugging lightly at the woman's sleeve. The fabric slipped just enough to reveal the ink. A dark, distinct tattoo etched along the soft skin of her forearm. At first glance, it might have been mistaken for an ordinary design. But for the Admiral, it was unmistakable. His breath caught. His jaw stiffened. That symbol, the coiled serpent encircling a broken blade, was one he had hoped never to see again. Memories rushed back with the force of cannon fire. A night raid in hostile waters, whispered oaths spoken in secrecy, and an order that had sealed the fate of men he had once called brothers. That tattoo was not a decoration. It was a mark of allegiance, a brand tied to a clandestine network that operated in shadows, far beyond the reach of ordinary military law. The Admiral rose slowly from his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. The room had fallen utterly silent. Even the aides and officers present felt the shift in the air, though they didn't understand why. The Admiral's eyes had hardened, locked on the mark that now glared at him like a ghost from his past. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a man used to being obeyed. The woman didn't flinch. She adjusted the baby in her arms and lifted her chin, her expression calm yet unyielding. "It was given to me," she replied softly, "by the same men you once commanded." Gasps echoed among the younger officers. The Admiral's aides exchanged nervous glances, their minds racing, but none dared to interrupt. The Admiral's world had shifted in an instant. She wasn't just a woman seeking an audience. She was a message, a living reminder of unfinished business, of secrets that had been buried but never forgotten. And standing there with a child in her arms, she had brought those secrets right to his doorstep. The room seemed smaller now, the weight of silence pressing down on every soul inside. The Admiral's eyes, sharp as steel, never left the tattoo. For years, he had buried the memory of that mark beneath duty and silence, hoping it would never resurface. Yet here it was, branded onto the arm of a woman standing before him with an infant in her grasp. He took a step closer, his boots striking the floor like distant thunder. "Who are you?" The words came out like a demand, not a question. The woman's gaze didn't falter. "You already know," she answered calmly, her tone carrying a quiet defiance that unsettled the aides in the room. The Admiral's jaw clenched. He did know. Not her name, not her face, but the unmistakable connection. That tattoo wasn't given lightly. It was reserved for those bound to a cause, one that had once danced dangerously close to mutiny, betrayal, and blood. He glanced at the child. "And the baby?" She held the infant tighter, almost instinctively. "The baby is why I came. He deserves to know where he comes from, what was taken, and who was responsible." A flicker of unease rippled across the Admiral's weathered face. The officers present stiffened, their confusion deepening. Words like "taken" and "responsible" hinted at shadows they were never meant to glimpse. The Admiral dismissed his aides with a sharp wave of his hand. "Out, all of you." They hesitated, torn between obedience and curiosity, but the authority in his tone left no room for resistance. One by one they filed out, closing the heavy door behind them until only the Admiral, the woman, and the child remained. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, steady and relentless. Finally, the Admiral's voice broke the silence. "That mark, it was the seal of a brotherhood long dissolved. What happened then?" He stopped, his words faltering. His hand tightened into a fist. "It was war. We all made choices." The woman's eyes softened, but not with sympathy, with resolve. "You call them choices. But for the men and women you left behind, they were sentences. My father bore that same mark. He died because of the decision you signed off on." The Admiral's chest tightened. He remembered. A mission gone wrong. Orders carried out in the dark, leaving allies to their fate so that others might live. It was the kind of decision that carved into a man's conscience and never truly healed. Her voice trembled now, not with weakness but with the force of a truth long carried. "I am his daughter. And this?" She gently rocked the child in her arms. "Is his grandson." The Admiral's breath hitched. The weight of legacy, the ghost of his past, and the innocence of the child all collided in his mind. The woman stepped forward, the baby between them. "I don't want vengeance. I want acknowledgement. The men who bore this mark deserve their place in history. Not erased, not hidden." The Admiral's stern composure cracked, if only for an instant. He looked at the child, then at the tattoo again. The past had finally caught up with him, and it stood not as an enemy, but as a plea. And for the first time in many years, the Admiral realized that the battle he had to fight now was not on the sea, but within his own conscience.